I'm on TRT, that is testosterone replacement therapy. Now, this is my story to getting on TRT, what happened, and getting my life back as a man.
Welcome to the Awesome Human Podcast, your path to total human optimization. Ready to unleash your 100%? Let's go.
Welcome back to the Awesome Human Podcast. I do hope you enjoyed the first two parts of this 3-part special all around men's health, men's mental health, and what it means to be awesome. So, in the last two shows, the first one I talked about depression, masculinity, what we need to do, in my opinion, from my perspective so far, to regain our full health, psychologically, physiologically, and the purpose that we have in our life, which is 3 of the pillars of the awesome human. And on episode 2, I talked to the doctor, a doctor that is very close to TRT, is prescribing it to, hundreds, thousands of men, who's been in practice for a very long time and prescribes my TRT. And today I want to talk about my journey, why I went on it, how it happened, what my levels were. Oh, excuse me, had to sneeze. We won't edit that out. Just because it takes more time. Anyway, TRT. So let me paint a little bit of a picture. Ever since the age of 18, pre-age 18, let's say like 12 years old, I was always obese. And how that affected my health, I've absolutely no idea. So the reason I sort of tell this part of the story is because there is always a genetic component to our health. We shouldn't ignore that. Genetics are extremely powerful. And the reason I bring that up is in the conversation of lifestyle, health improvement, longevity. We can talk about all of these optimizations, sleep, nutrition, medicine, supplements, all sorts of stuff. But we do have to consider genetics. And this is where genetic testing might show some validity and value and stuff. And what I mean by that is I've always felt as a young man that I had on the lower side of testosterone. Like, call it intuition, call it, struggle to kind of build muscle, call it I don't have very thick structures. When you meet a man and they've got like really thick forearms, big hands, yes, that's part of their structural makeup. But for me, that was always a sign of pretty strong testosterone levels. You've got higher strength, higher muscle mass, probably more inclined to do more physical based things because you've naturally got the kind of strength and kind of muscle mass there. That's just an assumption. I haven't got a huge amount of data in preparation for this podcast for that. So there's that kind of component to it. And then there was being obese for quite a while, how that affected my hormones. Again, absolutely no idea. Never did any testing as a youngster, that kind of thing. And then I got to the age of 18. I lost 5.5 stone of body fat. Then over the next 4 to 5 years, I built 3 stone of muscle. So I went from 16 stone to 10.5 stone to then 13.5-ish stone of muscle. And I've pretty much been that body weight ever since. So I tell that story because there might be something within it, and that can maybe give us answers to do with why something is happening in our body based on our genetics, the history, how we've behaved, how we've physically treated our body. From the age of 21 to 34, I've been an entrepreneur, and I very much built this persona of having an A-type personality, very driven, was always seeking, optimizing, every area of my life, nutrition, fitness, business, everything. I've been a life optimizer through and through kind of my whole life. And there's been pros to that and there's been cons to that. And I think that is part of this story. Now, within that, I pushed my body a lot. I pushed my body through exercise. I pushed my body through work. I traveled a lot. And at no stage did I not have fun. I've always really enjoyed life. I've lived it to the full. I've traveled a lot. I've always done pretty extreme things. I've jumped out of planes, hiked mountains, done all sorts of stuff. But within that amount of doing, I almost did it at such a pace that I put a huge amount of pressure on my central nervous system and my hormones, and combined with kind of genetics, potentially some damage from early years, I've ran into some testosterone problems. Then the COVID era hit, lockdown, I got COVID, I then got long COVID, and I have spoken to quite a lot of men that are in the same position as me, or I was, where COVID and then having long COVID has affected their hormones. Why this is the case, I do not know. At the time of looking about a year and a half ago, I couldn't find any data. I've not recently kind of looked because I don't have the proclivity to, because it's not part of my journey anymore. There's not kind of a need there, but it might show some answers that such a virus can initiate or do something. But for me, it was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. And when you look at fatigue-based illnesses that have a trigger of a virus, it tends to be what we see in the data as a bit of a trigger for the body to kind of shut down. It's kind of had enough. The central nervous system's so fatigued, it's overwhelmed, it shuts down the body. And then there's lots of systems that get affected within that. So pre-COVID, I was fit physically, like I could run a lot, do a lot, play sport. I would say I was constantly on the edge of burnout. So my central nervous system was running at like 3,000 miles an hour the whole time. And I generally put a lot of load into my body. Now, I had periods in kind of like, especially like late 20s, where I could sense that I was just pushing my body too much. Libido would suffer, which for me meant that there was an issue there with testosterone. Whether it was a natural thing, it was genetics, or whether it was because of the load that I was putting on my body, I will never know. That is a question I cannot answer. But all we can do is shine a light on it so that if you're in a similar situation, you can do something about it before a problem occurs. So then we got to kind of the pre-COVID era. Now my testosterone levels pre-COVID, because I've done a couple of tests, was 20.5. And that would kind of be considered, for my age, on the lower end of normal. For a fit, 30-year-old guy, you'd probably expect it to be a little bit higher. Anyway, we can also kind of potentially pair with that with some maybe environmental toxin issues that I was putting into my body. But because we know that cortisol and testosterone have to have like an optimal ratio in the body, it could be that because I was sort of so stressed and like putting so much pressure on my body, that the ratio was out of whack. And if I'd kind of dialed down, scaled down, chilled a bit more, whether that testosterone would naturally be a bit higher, the body would be in a better place. I've absolutely no idea. Hindsight's a beautiful thing. So then COVID happened. I got long COVID, battled with that for about 14 to 16 months in terms of that kind of like disease state, so to speak. And when I came out of that, I had testosterone of 13.5. And I was like, that could give reason why I've continued to have some symptoms. And those symptoms were depersonalization. So that means you're not feeling like you're living inside of your body. It's very eerie, like you don't feel emotions because of that. So like if something really happy happened, I'd be like, huh. And if something really sad happened, I'd just be like, huh. It was almost like I was dead inside and I was an observer looking into my body, observing my life. I then felt like pretty darn depressed most of the time. And that meant I also kind of worked and continued to work more than I should have done, because it actually just gave me a sense of purpose. I felt less depressed. I didn't get stuck in my head as much. And ideally, I probably should have backed off work during that time more, but I didn't because of that. I was then generally just very low, very mopey, really hard to live with. There was a point about 9 months ago now when what my wife actually told me. She didn't tell me at the time. She was like, I was actually having thoughts of like, will this ever end? Like, will there be a point where I say enough is enough? I'm leaving you because of living with you is just horrible, because you're just depressed. Like there's just no joy in our house because of your mood and stuff. So yeah, I was in a pretty bad way. Anyway, depersonalization, depressed, low mood, motivation is just like non-existent. I was like, and luckily I had a lot of habits and routines that kind of kept me going. So I'd still go to bed on time. I'd still eat well because I valued all of those things and I had strong inbuilt habits and routines already. If you hadn't, I could see where a different man in this situation would go a little bit off the rails because they don't have those strong, in-baked, healthy routines that would kind of keep you together like just a little bit more, if that kind of makes sense. Poor recovery. I don't know if really muscle mass was an issue, only because I hadn't exercised for nearly 2 years, so I had some muscle loss anyway. So I can't really say, oh, lower testosterone caused my muscle mass, because I just stopped exercising because I couldn't. And then pretty much non-existent libido. So they were all my symptoms. And after a while of doing a lot of kind of research and then the testing, I was like, low testosterone. So I started to optimize a little bit more. I started to, dial my sleep in even more, started to look at kind of environmental toxins a little bit, started to kind of make my diet a little bit more high fat, because we know saturated fat supports the pathway of making testosterone, started to de-stress a little bit, and did that for like 4 to 6 months, but it didn't change my testosterone level. So I was like, damn. And my symptoms were still there. In that time, I'd also gone to the doctor. So my wife sat me down and she was like, hey, look, this isn't getting any better. I think you should go to the doctor. Perhaps you've got clinical depression, there's medication, there's help. So the issue I had with that is intuitively I knew that I wasn't what I would describe as like mentally depressed. And you'll have to excuse me if you feel I am not being well chosen with my words here. I can only kind of explain this from my perspective. But like, I wasn't depressed from the perspective that, my life was bad. I'd had a lack of purpose. I had a lack of meaning. I felt that there was physiologically something that was causing me to kind of feel this way. And with having low testosterone, that would make sense. But I sat down with the doctor and, we had a big long chat. I talked about things and they were like, yeah, you're clinically depressed. You have they did a scoring system, they did a thing. And they were like, our only real option here would be therapy. And I was like, well, the thing is I already have a therapist. I've been speaking to a therapist for like 18 months and probably even longer than that. I got one as soon as I got ill because I knew I needed support on the journey. And she said the only real other solution is antidepressants. And at that point, because of kind of like sort of what my wife had said, how kind of stuck I felt, I was like, fine, cool, I'll try antidepressants. So I went on citalopram and I did that for 3 months. Straight away, I noticed a real decline in sleep quality. I wasn't sleeping amazingly, 2 young kids, and with those symptoms, when I woke up in the night, I found it quite hard to get back to sleep because I felt dreadful. So I went on these antidepressants, sleep struggled, and then I kind of felt maybe a tiny bit better, but that was it. And then because my sleep deteriorated, I ended up feeling worse. So I took myself off the medication, contacted my doctor. I said, look, I've taken myself off the medication. I really don't think it's helping. And they were like, okay, fine. And that was it. I was like, wow, okay. So then I, as you do, started to look for more and more answers. I started to talk to more people, got my testosterone, my kind of overall blood panel. And I do recommend a full blood panel rather than just looking at your hormones, because there might be other things that are like causing it. For example, we know certain nutrients like vitamin D, zinc, magnesium can kind of play into this scenario. So you'd want to know that rather than just going, oh, my hormones are out of whack, and not knowing that there's maybe some low-hanging fruit that you could optimize to help out with your hormonal health. So I did a full blood panel. Levels came back at like 13.2 or something like that. And then I happened to be having a chat with a friend who'd had testosterone replacement therapy. He said, hey, listen to this podcast. This podcast was with Dr. Robert Stevens that he'd done on his podcast called Off Script, which is a podcast I've also been on. It was a beautiful interview, Ty Temmel, really cool. And he goes, look, why don't you just talk to the doctor? So I set up a consultation. I sent him all my notes. I sent him my blood results and stuff, and he was like, okay. So he phoned me up and he was like, look, I'll be honest, straight off the bat, I don't often say this, but because of like your notes, what you're doing, your situation, your blood markers, I think you might be right for TRT. Like all the signs would indicate that way. And mentally, that was my big first battle of having to accept that at 37, 36, I would be needing to go on to TRT. And it kind of felt like it took away some of my manhood at that point in time. I kind of felt like, oh, kind of my brain, my testicles are not working properly. They're not producing enough testosterone. And, I'm the fit guy. I'm the healthy guy. I kind of know about this stuff. So I had a real battle with accepting it and kind of shifting my identity to kind of having that within it. And the problem is I've been on a huge journey of self-development, adjusting my mindset in many ways, and going on a very spiritual journey, to be honest, the last sort of 18 months. And the problem that I had as a human is that I was attaching too much of my identity and self-worth on things that people would look in at me on and potentially judge me by. So the amount of exercise I did externally from other people might be a judgment on my character, my body fat percentage. Like there was quite a few things that I would then judge my self-worth and character on. And I've worked through that, and I've come to a place now where I'm extremely happy with who I am in whatever state that I am. Now, that doesn't mean I don't try and optimize myself and try and be healthy every day, but I don't attach things to myself anymore. So, for example, I might get up in the morning, not sleep as well, and previous me would be like, oh, I'm not going to have as good a day today. I'm feeling a bit off my game. Like my aura scores said X or whatever. And I would like judge myself and my future ability and present ability based on the fact that I might have not had a good night's sleep or not, which is really, when you think of it, ridiculous. If I wasn't exercising regularly, if I wasn't in the gym lifting weights, then I would kind of judge my self-worth and my dedication to the gym against myself, and then I'd like almost want to be getting back to the gym through fear of like, oh, if I'm not in the gym, then I'm not going to be this person, and I'm not going to be validated in the world. And ultimately, these are all ridiculous thoughts, but they're all stories that I'd created in my subconscious that I needed to deal with. And part of this TRT journey and starting to really look at how the body affects the mind affects the body, and how aligned we are as a human has led me to break away from all these stories that don't serve me anymore, rewrite my kind of beliefs about myself, disconnect from external judgments and sources of information that I might have attached my self-worth to, and also work through a lot of past trauma in my life around school, parenting, different situations. I've done a lot of trauma release therapy that's really allowed me to be a very free soul now, and it's actually quite beautiful. So I'm trying to kind of regress back to where I was talking about with the TRT. So that was my first battle with the mental side of it. Now, it took me quite a while to adjust, I'm going to be honest, probably like a good 6 months to really like accept that path that I was on. But I came to accept it kind of two things. One, I reflected in that I'd always felt my testosterone was kind of a bit low, and I just had in my head that by the time I got to like 40 or something like that, I'd kind of need support, that I was just a man that would need it a bit earlier. So kind of like intuitively, I knew it was there, but unfortunately, I just accelerated that part of my journey by 5 or so years because of the long COVID, because of how much pressure I'd put on my body, kind of just getting to the point of breaking, really. And the second thing is, again, being on TRT it's not a judgment on my character, it's not a judgment on my self-worth, it's not a judgment on me as a person at all, it just is now part of me as a human. And scientifically, biologically, from the information that I've got anyway, from others and Dr. Stevens, I am in needing of that type of support medically if I want to feel X, which is, for me, awesome. So that's how I kind of came to terms with it. And I'd love to say it took me a couple of weeks to just be like, boom, and accept it. But it didn't. It was quite a journey for me, and hopefully me sharing that with you. If you end up going on this journey or know someone, you can come to that acceptance phase sooner, because when we can accept, we can move on, because otherwise it becomes, quite a dark place to be. So I went on TRT, and I have been for 20 months now or something like that. And initially I felt absolutely great, felt superhuman, felt like a bull in a china shop. I was like, whoa, Jesus, wow, this stuff's great. And then you have that for 5 or 6 weeks, and then it kind of tapers off a bit. And then you have quite a low phase, and then it really slowly gets to optimal. And that getting to optimal, or I say normal optimal, because from my understanding of what Dr. Roberts said last week, you're not trying to create any kind of supra-physiological environment with TRT. You're trying to simply get a man's levels back to normal, but optimal for that person. So reference ranges for testosterone, as quoted last week, tend to be between sort of 10 and 30, 12 and 30. So if you can be closer to 30, that's the optimal range of normal for a man. And I think the last time I tested, my level was 30.2 or 32, something like that. It was literally just over 30. Great, absolutely brilliant. But it took me nearly a year to get to that point, as your kind of hormonal system goes through these really slow kind of adjustments, because I'm basically telling my brain not to produce the testosterone that I was producing, and now move over to this kind of intravenous form of testosterone that I'm kind of taking every day. So how do I feel now? I feel phenomenal, but taking the testosterone wasn't the solution to all my problems. And Dr. Stevens really supported this point last week. He uses this phrase called earn your reward. And what he means by that is, for you to have the reward of feeling great as a human, you have to earn it. You have to earn it through good practices with your health, sleeping well, eating well, training sensibly, de-stressing, disconnecting, all those things that I talked about in part 1 of this podcast, where we look after our innate human needs biologically and psychologically so we can thrive as a human. Now, I went on TRT, and for the most part I felt pretty brilliant, physically and psychologically, but I had a lot of deep inner spiritual battle. I'll call them spiritual, and we can frame them mental, emotional. I had deep mental, emotional battles going on. And it was because I'd been so stuck in my head for so long, 3 years, because of the illnesses, that I kind of needed to pull my head out of myself. I needed to really reframe how I viewed myself, the things that I was attaching to my self-worth, the belief patterns that no longer were serving me, the new identity that I had, which was, I'm a dad now, life's changed, I've moved, we've had COVID. There's all these things that had kind of changed in my world, but I'd been stuck in this place where every day I was just trying to get better. So I had to reframe and work on loads of stuff. And in that journey, alongside the TRT, I've been having energy therapy, I've been meditating a lot, I've been really into Wim Hof breathing, which I think is incredibly powerful, that everyone should do. I've tried a couple of forms of psychedelics in different forms, in different situations, for different purposes, quite often with breath work as well, which I think is amazingly powerful. What else have I tried? I've been doing inner voice frequency training on the brain, which has actually been quite significant. That's been pretty cool. And been doing a lot of reflection and a lot of just work, deep inner work on myself. And, we can call it a spiritual journey, but either way, it's been incredibly beautiful. And what I've tried to do is just make my character and who I am blossom, and really just be totally free and expand. And within that, what I found, or within this journey, what I found is there was quite a lot of bits of me that I didn't like anymore. And I actually wanted to change them. And part of this journey was about me changing the bits of who I am that I didn't actually like. The fact that I wasn't actually a very compassionate person, and I wanted to be compassionate. I wanted to approach life and the people in it through love rather than, what is the alternative? That is now the question that I would raise to myself and anyone else. But I've been so stuck within myself for so long about my own goals, and I served myself for a long time, and I served others even through that lens. And I didn't want to serve people through that lens anymore. So a big part of that journey has been really kind of reshaping myself, but also just unleashing really myself and getting to my truth. And it's been beautiful. So TRT, for me, what does it cost? Let's be honest. Talking practically. So getting set up, it cost me like around £800 with like the initial consultations, a bit of testing, that kind of stuff with the doctor. And then ongoing now, it costs me anywhere from like £110 to £130 a month. That includes all my medication, needles, that kind of stuff. And then I'll now take a blood test about one every year. And for me personally, I'll use the Ultimate Performance Blood Test from Medichecks. If you use the code BEN10, you can get 10% off. And that's because if I'm going to do blood work, I want to test as much as humanly possible. So I'll go test my vitamins, my minerals, my liver, my kidney, like everything, rather than just testing how my male hormones are doing, because I want to pick up on literally anything that might be going on. And I would kind of recommend that you do the same. Day to day, I'll get up in the morning, I'll hydrate, and around sort of 5:30 to 6:30, I'll take my TRT medications. They're in injections. I put them mostly in my thigh, sometimes in my stomach, but I find my thigh is the most comfortable. And I take testosterone, cypionate, HCG, and tadalafil every day. That's kind of my medications. And please don't go away and think, oh, that's what I need, because you should be doing this under the care of a physician. This isn't me, giving medical advice. I'm literally saying, this is my journey. This is what I take. This is how it looks. This is how much it costs. The reality is, if you're a man listening, watching this, and you have some of the symptoms that I used to have, depression, low motivation, fatigue, poor recovery, etc., get a blood test. Get a blood test and see what's going on. And importantly, this is very important, get a good interpretation of the results. So many men are going to the NHS GP, getting a blood test, and the GP is saying, you're okay, you're in normal range. In my experience, and Dr. Stevens supports this from last week's show, is that the reference ranges are too low. You could go in as a 32-year-old healthy, fit male and get a score of 11, which is woeful, like it's awful testosterone, and your doctor would say, you're fine, you don't have low testosterone. The problem is the reference ranges are for people that are 18 to 80. So you could have the testosterone level of an 80-year-old man and your GP will still say, yeah, it's fine, pat you on the back. The NHS is not set up for this. My experience, having spoken to probably a good 50 men on this topic, and the opinion of Dr. Stevens, is the NHS will not be equipped for this. It's currently not equipped for this, and it's probably not going to be equipped for this in the short term. And really, we can raise the question, is this part of the NHS's job to be providing for a thing like this? Like, the NHS was built to be, ultimately an emergency service to fix people when they're in a bit of a pickle. But anyway, that's a debate for another day. The reality is, if you're a man in this situation, please go get a good blood test. Please get a good interpretation. Please also do the things that you can to naturally increase your testosterone levels. There's lots of free information online. Downloading the Awesome Human Blueprint will help you hugely, because that will optimize you as a human in a 24-hour cycle over the 7-day kind of week. And I think that's me done. I think I've worked through everything. If I haven't, please reach out to me on social media, ask a question, and I will maybe do another bit of, this kind of show and talk more about it, because I don't want to leave information unsaid. Otherwise, what to do after today? Well, subscribe to the show, because hopefully it's awesome and giving you value. Use code BEN10 to get an ultimate performance test off MediChecks and download the awesome blueprint and be an awesome human. Goodbye.